Okay. So, from understanding various kinds of plots, now we move on to understanding conflict as an element of a plot. Conflict as a plot element. So, conflict is defined as an element that really captures our interest. No conflict, no plot, no story. Every story needs to have some kind of a conflict. You can think about, because our especially in our culture, Indian cinema, all narratives are full of conflicts. Most of these conflicts are external conflicts. So, yeah, we'll come to that. So, conflicts heightens the intensity of our experience, arouses emotions and challenges our minds. So, if there is no conflict, there is no story. So, we will be looking at certain plot elements. So, conflict is one element and characterization is another element, which we will be discussing in the next class, but today we will continue a plot discussion with reference to conflict. Conflict leads to complexity in plot. Even in a story like in a fairy tale like Cinderella, you have an understated conflict between Cinderella and her stepmother and her sisters. To make a narrative interesting, forces of conflict should be equal in strength, and therefore, in all superhero movies you find that the villain is as powerful, if not more, than the villain. I mean, Terminator is a very good example. Schwarzenegger's Terminator, second Terminator, the Judgment Day, is a very good example where the adversary is much stronger than the protector, the robot hero. So, conflicts can be physical. For example, in the western genre, gangster action movies. Conflict can also be psychological. For example, films of Ingmar Bergman, where characters discuss larger issues and not just immediate conflicts, not just defeating their immediate adversaries. So, there are larger issues: what is life, what is death, what is the meaning of several existentialist issues. So, that is an internal conflict, that is very European in concept. Cinema of Fellini, 8½, if you have watched. How many of you have watched 8½? Wonderful movie. Yes, 8½. Fellini's at 8½, is all about director's block. You know, you must have heard of a writer's block. A writer, one day he just realizes he can't write anymore. In 8½, our director, Fellini's autobiographical shades, he just discovers that he can't direct anymore. He has no ideas what to do. So, that is 8½. That 8½ has been remade as a musical called 9, Daniel Day-Lewis's. This is a movie, Rob Marshall movie, which we will be discussing in this class soon. But so, I would suggest that you watch 8½ as well as 9, and then we will talk about remaking cinema. Conflict, psychological and physical, there can also be a combination of the two, as in John Wayne's The Searchers. The conflict is as much physical as psychological. 7:2, 7 is also a very good example of both kinds of conflicts happening at the same time. What conflict is this? This is still from the Godfather. Brando and Al Pacino, and I am more interested in Al Pacino's conflict, Michael Corleone. For the most part of the film, what do you think? Is it psychological or physical? Psychological. He is torn between his loyalties towards himself, towards what he actually is, and towards his family, what they want him to become. So, there is therefore a great performance. Taxi Driver, again, Martin Scorsese's Robert De Niro starring Taxi Driver, both kinds of conflicts, combination of both kinds of conflicts. He is a war veteran and he is unable to come to terms with the world around him. Okay. So, he is already on the verge of a breakdown. So, it is not like the external factors just act as a catalyst in Taxi Driver. Yes, Travis Bickle. So, yeah.
There's that scene where he's talking to himself in the mirror. He's looking at himself in the mirror and he has this long monologue where he's talking to himself. And
are you talking to me?
yeah.
Yes.
But how's that a
internal conflict? Yeah, he is not. It's not a very physical conflict with.
What is the conflict in here? I mean,
he is a man frustrated about so many things, and he feels almost impotent that he cannot tackle the issues head on. So, he has to do something. So, goes on a killing rampage. Yeah. He has several issues. If you watch the movie, and I would suggest you watch the movie at the earliest, and then you will find how racist and sexist Travis Bickle's character is. There is a scene where he has a passenger in the back seat, and the passenger raves and rants about his wife who has been unfaithful to him, and that role is played, a 2-minute cameo played by Martin Scorsese himself. Okay. And you will find that how sexist in tone is that dialogue, that exchange. Even the opening scene where he looks at the city, and it's, you know, it's a very expressionistic scene. Green lights, green gas, that means noxiousness, poison, everything is there around him. But do we find these green lights and green gases all around us? Not necessarily. Martin Scorsese is telling us that his mind is already vitiated. Okay. There is already something, you know, something really rotten inside his mind, and that forms expression in the form of those green lights. We have done expressionism at some point in one of our earlier classes. Expressionism is nothing but giving a physical color, a physical setting to whatever is happening inside. So, inner turmoil is manifested in the external surroundings. So, we watch those poisonous gases and green lights through Travis Bickle's eyes, point of view shot, right, an extreme close up of Robert De Niro's eyes at the beginning of the film. So, watch the film again and ask yourself, why does the movie begin with an extreme close up of De Niro's eyes? Why? Scorsese is telling us that he is taking you inside the mind of the man. Therefore, very important to understand. Otherwise, you will not find such shots in a franchise like Die Hard, extreme close up of Bruce Willis's beautiful eyes. You will never find that happening. Why? The conflict is largely physical and external. Okay, so, you do not have to understand his mind at all, but here you have to understand that this is already a troubled man. So, external conflict where we have two equally strong opposing forces coming together, Batman and Bane, Doc Ock and Spider-Man. Let us assume that the hero is all powerful pitted against a weak villain. Do you think that the intensity of the conflict would remain the same? Give me some example from our own cinema where you have two equally strong forces coming together. We need a strong villain so that hero can be projected appropriately. Very good example. Whatever you may think of the movie, okay, the quality of the film, but Agnipath has a very strong villain, especially in the recent remake, played by Sanjay Dutt, Kancha China's role. So, as physically powerful or as you know, in fact, he is like Bane. He reminds you of Bane. Yeah, an utterly evil character. Okay, so the hero has to muster all his energies, including his spiritual energies, to fight. It's not just a physical conflict anymore. Okay. External conflict can also happen against forces of authority. So, hero may not be physically very powerful, okay, but he has that moral strength. All the President's Men, Woodward and Bernstein. Okay, so they were not bashing up anyone. Okay. So, and they can be against corrupt and oppressive regimes or conditions. Yes?
But underdog movies, by making the weaker person the hero, they create like a situation where it's okay to have unequal conflict. Right?
Yeah.
But they've just shifted the hero so it becomes okay for the conflict.
But the hero has to match up. Yes, the hero has to match up to the adversary who may be physically more strong. For example, in Rocky movie, yeah, he has to train himself, okay, to such an extent, and he goes to great lengths. I mean, we remember Eyes of the Tiger. So, you know that. Okay, so, he has to come up. So, that is his story. Okay, 400 Blows by Truffaut, Les 400 Coups, where it tells you a story of a juvenile adolescent, and it's mostly his internal conflict. So, therefore, you find the child hero at the end, when he is sent to a rehab, he looks at the world through these barbed wires, almost like a little animal captured behind these things. So, that is an internal conflict. There is no external conflict in the movie. On the Waterfront, combination of both, external as well as internal. Elia Kazan's, Marlon Brando. So, watch this movie if possible, and then we will be discussing the film. Beyond the Professional, isn't it extremely external? A combination, yeah. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The conflict is against the corrupt, the stifling system. Actually, when the book was written, it was written as a response to the oppressive regimes. So, the hospital becomes a representative of a particular system where people, where everyone is forced to conform, and one hero comes along and rebels against the system. All the President's Men, external conflict, largely against the corrupt regime. Robert Redford's 3 Days of the Condor is another example of one man pitted against forces of corruption, directed by Sidney Pollack. We have a film like Braveheart. Conflict is internal, of course, psychological, of course, but largely external, largely physical. Gladiator. the hero has been pushed to the limit, okay, and then he rises. And again that I think it responds to your question. Physically he is no match for against his adversaries. I mean, we know what he goes through the entire course of the movie, but then still at the end he manages to salvage his honor. So, it is a quest to salvage one's honor. Okay. He has no desire to go on living happily ever after. Okay. All he wants is, those are the famous lines, father to a dead son, husband to a murdered wife. Yes, that is how he sees himself. So, external and physical conflict can apart from corrupt forces and corrupt regimes, can also be against forces of nature, one man against nature. So, Castaway, Tom Hanks playing a modern day Robinson Crusoe and having conversations with his Wilson, the football. So, he does not have a man Friday, he has a football. Conflict against forces of nature, the curious case of Benjamin Button. He cannot fight, I mean, this is a malady he suffers from and he has to live with it. Again, Amitabh Bachchan's Pa is an example of conflict with the forces of nature. Yeah, there are no villains there. Any comment, any observation at this point? Can you think of more examples, conflict against nature?
James Franco film.
Okay.
127.
Okay, and why do you think that's, what happens there?
He gets trapped in a situation where no one rescues him.
You get the answer, 127 hours. Yeah, so,
Ma'am, but isn't that more about internal conflict?
no, he's trapped in a situation which is, a man pitted against the forces of nature. I think conflict is internal because he has to make a very tough decision, chopping off his hand in order to live on. Okay, that's a conflict. Okay, but then largely the conflict is against, he does not come to this situation having internal conflicts. The internal conflict is a product of his conflict with the nature, for the forces of nature, and extremely mighty forces of nature.
Could disaster movies also come
Could,
under
absolutely. Disaster movies. The other day I was telling my son about a movie called, it's a very unsuccessful movie and not really well known. A movie of the 80s, a Hindi film called The Burning Train. The Burning Train, it's a disaster movie where there is a train, a super fast train built by our hero, and the villain, because he is so jealous, he plants a bomb in the train, and it so happens that the brakes of the train fail and the train is just going on, and it has all kinds of passengers, a priest, a prostitute, a bunch of children, and a variety, to complete microcosm of universe. So, yeah, extremely melodramatic movie. Now, it's a very good example of disaster film, okay, but that disaster is brought on by a man.
What about natural disasters like Independence Day or something? That
Independence Day is a sci-fi, right? Contagion. Contagion is a good example. The movie with Tommy Lee Jones, what was it called? Volcano? Yeah, I think there was a movie called Volcano, Forces of Nature.
The Day After Tomorrow.
Yes, The Day After Tomorrow. That's a, yeah,
Jurassic Park also is
Forces of Nature. Yeah, but then it's also sci-fi. Yeah, so disasters brought on by civilization upon itself. Yeah. In Hindi movie, in Hindi cinema, we don't have much any great examples of disaster films. Okay, we have great examples of internal external conflict, but if you look at a cinema movie like Castaway and all, I can't think of any example just like that. Perhaps you can think of something in regional languages, perhaps. Other examples? Disaster movies from regional cinema. It's not a popular genre in our country.
Damn 999.
Is it an Indian movie?
Indian plus whatever you want to call it. It was
Okay.
released by Fox Cinemas, if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
It's a bad movie.
All right. So now we are talking about interior and psychological conflict, where characters are caught between two sides of their personality. So again, think Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. Conflict can also be about how the protagonist exorcises the demons within and not just outside. Sometimes the inner conflict is resolved and sometimes it stays unresolved. So that's the problem with depicting psychological conflict.
I still have a question regarding
Yes, please.
He sees all the issues. The state of affairs is pretty bad. But what balance against which forces he has to make a decision? I mean, he just sees one problem and he has to take up. He has to perhaps go against it. It's just
The movie begins the hero talking to himself, and you hear it in a homodiegetic voiceover narration, where he says that I am sick of this world. Now, Taxi Driver is written by, the screenplay was written by Paul Schrader. Okay, Paul Schrader, who has been a constant collaborator with Martin Scorsese, he tells us that he derived the plot of Taxi Driver from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, which also begins with a famous line, I am a very sick man. The malady is not some cancer or something more fatal, but it's a sickness of the mind. I hate humankind. I hate mankind. That's the idea. That's what you find in Taxi Driver even at the opening of the film. He is already, because he has seen so much of destruction, so many disasters during the war. He is a war veteran, remember. It's also a response to the Vietnam War of, see, all these new age Hollywood filmmakers. Who are the foremost filmmakers of the new wave Hollywood? Coppola, who made Apocalypse Now, and The Godfather, of course. You have Martin Scorsese, who started his career not with Taxi Driver or even with Mean Streets, but goes back to Who Is That Knocking at My Door. Okay, so that was a new kind of a cinema. Okay, we'll talk about when we talk about some select directors. Then also Woody Allen. Woody Allen movies are also largely dealing with internal and psychological conflicts. I mean, where is the conflict in any hall if you have watched the movie? Nice people, both of them, meant to live together forever. Okay, in a romantic comedy, things would have ended up very differently for them. But here it ends very differently. They have to part ways because the man cannot come to terms with his own inner eccentricities. So, in Taxi Driver also there are plenty of inner eccentricities. Godard's existentialist hero, Jean-Paul Belmondo, playing his hero in Breathless, a bout de souffle, morally ambiguous character, extremely existentialist in his worldview. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, conflict is largely internal or psychological. I think of The Deer Hunter, which is a very good combination of both kinds of conflicts, internal as well as external. How many of you have watched Deer Hunter? Please watch it, make it a point. One of these days, sit down and watch a couple of movies like Annie Hall, Apocalypse Now, The Godfather, if you haven't already done so, Taxi Driver, watch it again, and Deer Hunter. Okay, these are the films we will be talking about very frequently in this course. Conflict, internal as well external, do we agree? That is the situation in the Dark Knight Rises, and also Batman Begins. So, trilogy is more about internal as well as external conflict. I would say most of the time, especially in the Dark Knight Rises, the conflict is within himself, with himself. So, thank you very much. We will be meeting tomorrow. Thank you.